It's the Growing for Market podcast.
The whole conventional food system is bad and it's getting worse. It's making us sick. It's killing us. You and I both have PFAS in our body. We both have glyphosate in our body. This is a fact of living in America. It's part of the air we breathe, the water we drink, and it comes from agriculture. I was just listening to a Paul Hawken book today called Carbon, very good book. He was talking about the insect apocalypse and just the amazing reduction in the numbers of insects in our country, which means an equivalent reduction in the number of birds in our country. And, it's all an ecosystem and we think we can mess with it, but we can't. It will come back on us. So I just say that to highlight that chemical agriculture is for real. It's a really bad, serious problem. It's going to make our kids sick. I've got 3 nephews who got cancer young. One of them died. There's no family history here. These are environmental toxins entering us. And it's not only agriculture, but agriculture is the big driver.
Hello, and welcome to the Growing for Market podcast, where we talk about growing, marketing, and the business of growing vegetables and flowers for local markets like farmers markets, CSAs, farm stands, and local wholesaling. I'm Andrew Mefford, your host and the editor of Growing for Market magazine for 34 years, the magazine for flower and vegetable market farmers. If you're enjoying the podcast, just wait till you see the magazine. Go to growingformarket.com for more. Also, if you could give us a follow and a rating, it really helps other like-minded people find the podcast. And now, let's take a minute to hear from our sponsors. It's with their generous support that we can bring you the podcast for free. Spring is here, and CSA season is in full swing. If you're ready to grow your CSA and reclaim your time, Farmhand is here to help. With built-in marketing and subscription tools that automate everything, from customer support and newsletters to weekly add-ons and billing, Farmhand helps you delegate the busy work so you can stay focused on the farm. On average, Farmhand saves CSA farmers over 10 hours a week. That's 10 extra hours to spend with your family, in the field, or just taking a well-earned breather. Set up a one-to-one demo with Ari, Farmhand's founder and a farmer himself. He'll show you exactly how to streamline your operations, grow your CSA, and stay competitive, all with tools designed for small farms. Make this your most profitable season yet. Get started at farmhand.partners/GFM. That's farmhand.partners/GFM. Harnois Greenhouses has been pioneering greenhouse design since 1965, working alongside market gardeners and farmers across North America to deliver turnkey greenhouse solutions. Their mission is simple: supporting growers' success with innovative, high-performance structures engineered for strength, efficiency, and longevity. Designed to withstand high snow and wind loads, their greenhouses optimize brightness, boost yields, and offer a rapid ROI. With over 20,000 projects completed, they're more than just a manufacturer. They're a trusted partner in building sustainable, energy-efficient growing environments. Their NRCS-approved freestanding greenhouse, the Ovaltech, remains a top choice for year-round production. And in 2025, they're introducing a new low-tech high tunnel, starting at just $2 per square foot, perfect for growers seeking an affordable, durable solution. As a Growing for Market listener, you'll receive an exclusive 5% discount on all new structures. Harnois Greenhouses, leading the way in turnkey solutions for local growers. Check them out at harnois.com. That's HARNOIS.com. Today, I have the pleasure of welcoming Dave Chapman to the Growing for Market podcast. Dave is the co-director of the Real Organic Project, and he also runs Long Wind Farm in Vermont, where he grows a lot of Real Organic certified greenhouse tomatoes. He is also a founding member of the Vermont Organic Farmers. So without further ado, welcome to the podcast, Dave.
Thank you, Andrew. Pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you. So obviously you're here mostly to talk about the Real Organic Project, but since we got an audience full of farmers, would you tell us a little bit about your farm? Your website says that Long Wind Farm began with you and a team of oxen in 1984. So how did you get from there to a glass greenhouse?
Just a long series of bad decisions, right? I look back on the team of oxen and I go, I think I had something there. We came to this land. We were just very fortunate to buy it at a very affordable price. It's right on the Connecticut River. It's beautiful. And we did what we were already doing, which was to grow vegetables in the field. But because we owned the land, we were able to build our first kind of real greenhouse. And this was so long ago that there were no hoops. So we built it out of 2x4s. And really, there were no greenhouse vegetables. There were two farms I knew of in the Northeast who had greenhouse tomatoes. And so I think we were number three. And we built two greenhouses that were just terribly designed. And, they really swayed in the wind, and they weren't strong, and they didn't have any head clearance. Everything was wrong. And then we discovered John Bartok down in Connecticut, and he sent us plans for 2x6 with plywood gussets. And so our greenhouses got much better. And we kept building them because people kept wanting to buy more tomatoes. And there was no competition. So it was us in Florida and Mexico and California. And ours were so vastly superior in taste that it was no competition. And over time, I went on a fact-finding trip to Holland with Elliot Coleman and Paul Harlow and Davey Miskell. So I had very good company for that. And we were trying to learn about organic vegetables. And we saw a lot of greenhouses in Holland, large organic greenhouses growing in the soil. And that was inspiring and also kind of a note of warning. It looked like a lot of responsibility to have a greenhouse like that, like you never got to go on vacation. But anyway, we came back, and Davey Miskell and I both decided to do it. He did first, and then I had somebody come and join our team who was very good and expensive. And I thought, well, we better up our game. So we decided to build one too. And they were each about 1/3 of an acre of glass greenhouse, fancy Dutch glass. And, and then a few years later, I built an acre added on to that. And then a few years later, we built another acre next to it. So we ended up with just about 2.5 acres of greenhouses, all soil, all tomatoes. And by then we had cycled out. We weren't growing anything in the field. The oxen were gone. To a very happy family. They did good work. And I became a tomato grower.
Cool. It's interesting that you mentioned about the wooden greenhouses, because I often think that the bent hoops and plastic were really kind of like the democratization of greenhouse growing. And I also think about it because one of my granddad's jobs, he did a lot of different things, but one of the things he did was to build wooden framed greenhouses for a big greenhouse operation in Pennsylvania that I think they were just local, and he was a carpenter amongst many other things. And I think about how much harder it would be to build a wooden greenhouse, right? Because we have greenhouses that we just bought the kits, and it's pretty, they come pre-bent. We basically, feel like you need very little skill to actually put them up. And so I think that now there's tons of them around. I think that led to a lot of people being able to do greenhouse growing.
Yeah, absolutely. And for better and for worse, there are large parts of, say, Spain, which are covered with hoop houses, also Mexico, covered with them. And it's not all good, but it's almost inevitable. It is so cheap and affordable to put up a hoop house. And I mean, God, they were giving them away for a while. So, I have thoughts about it, about like economically, like what makes sense and how cheap should you go. And you can go really cheap, crudest of hoop houses, single layer of plastic, or you can go really fancy, a glass house with double energy curtain and a pipe rail system. And they all have an economic logic to them. It just really depends on what fits for you and your farm and your what level of risk you're comfortable with.
Yes. And it's going to be a whole different crop coming out of a single layer unheated hoop house versus a double layer or heated greenhouse. And so people just have to know what they're in for.
That's right.
Can I ask, are all your tomato plants grafted?
Yes.
You're grafting. Okay, that's kind of what I would thought, but you never know. That's why I wanted to ask.
I think we were certainly among the first grafters in the United States. Canada was a little bit ahead of us, and Davey and I traveled up first to Quebec and then to Ontario. And finally, I went to British Columbia to learn, and it evolved as we went. So at first it was what we called the Dutch graft, where they were about finger thickness, and you'd whittle this into a wedge and make a slit here, and you'd slide it in the slit, and then you'd tape it. And this would be in a 6-inch pot. And you'd plant that. That was it. And then we switched to what we called the Japanese graft, where we decapitated it. It was much smaller. And back then we had a pin that fit in the stem. And so you'd put the two cuts together and they would sometimes flop over. And then somebody suggested tubing. And so we bought tubing and we slid it lengthwise and cut it. So now they have these beautiful soft plastic tubes that just fit in. So they've really got it down. But the biggest challenge was to get the climate right in the tent. That was 90% of the success or failure.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm spoiled because I've done a lot of grafting, but I've come up in the area with the nice little tubes with the clips on the side, and yeah, I mean that top grafting is so much faster than anything else. That's definitely what I would recommend for any.
But you've also come up in the time when it's kind of common knowledge how to build the tent and how to control the tent. It was not when I started. We did our first grafting. I think we did it in a walk-in cooler with mist. And we thought, well, we get the humidity really high. We killed everything, 100%. So that wasn't a good idea. And I saw my first tents in British Columbia, and they were huge. I mean, they were, I don't know, an eighth of an acre tent, and then another eighth of an acre, another. All they did at this 20-acre greenhouse was grow tomato transplants and pepper transplants, and they were grafting everything. So we got to see how it was done and take some pictures, and we came back and adapted it to our situation. But now we have a very high success rate.
Good. Yeah. What are your markets like? Where do you sell your tomatoes?
We mostly, I mean, we sell them to stores. We have a tiny direct retail stand at our farm. People come and serve themselves, but mostly we're wholesaling to chains. Over the years, we've sold to Stop and Shop and Shaw's and Hannaford's and Whole Foods and lots of co-ops and some smaller ones too, Roach Brothers. And Fresh Direct now. Yeah, that's another newer one.
Okay. And can you tell us a bit about the genesis of the ROP in that case? Sorry, I guess I should say Real Organic Project. We probably will abbreviate it to ROP, but.
Yeah, sure. Real Organic Project started in the winter, January or so of 2018. And it came directly as a result of a regulatory defeat in the National Organic Standards Board in November of 2017 down in Jacksonville, Florida. Mm-hmm. So that Jacksonville meeting was a big deal, and no resolution, no recommendation was passed. What was defeated was a compromise to allow growing in containers, but you could only use 20% of the nitrogen could be supplied as a liquid feed. And it was really a way of eliminating hydroponic as being certified as organic. But it would still allow some container growing. That was defeated, and it was defeated by people who wanted to permit hydroponic. 60 farmers went, and only a handful supported it, but they weren't there because the ones who didn't support it wasn't because they supported hydroponic. They did not. And even so, and they were very eloquent people testifying, and Fred Kirschman was there, and Elliot Coleman was there, although he refused to testify because he didn't want to give any respect to the USDA by saying they had the right to make this decision. So it was great. There were really great farmers from all over the country. And when we came back, a bunch of us from Vermont were there. And when we came back, we had lost. And we knew that this meant the USDA would now say, we've got a green light. All the hydro guys would go, we got a green light. It's a go. And they did. It really exploded after that. And a group of farmers met at the NOFA headquarters, just impromptu, called around, 30 people showed up. And we said, well, are we going to just roll over and say, okay, well, organic used to be what I believe in, but it's still a tool for me to get to my market? Or are we going to do something? And everyone wanted to do something. They all wanted to start some kind of a label so they could be acknowledged in the marketplace for doing it the right way. And actually, the majority of the farmers wanted it to be a standalone, not an add-on, not added on to the USDA. They wanted to let's have a new organic label. And by the second meeting, we agreed we would do it as an add-on just because it's so hard. It takes so much money. Even to do what we're doing is hard because we became national. And if it had just been the northern part of the Northeast, it would have been much easier. But we went national. So, yeah, that's what happened. And we got our first employee. A few months later, some very generous person, David Hollenbeck, came up and offered support so we could afford to hire somebody. I am a volunteer, but we hired Lindley Dixon, who is tremendous. And now we have about 10 people on staff.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And we'll be talking with Lindley. I'll be talking with her later in the week. So just because the amount of issues that you guys work on are so broad, wanted to make sure and have enough time to give everything its due. So our audience will have a chance to hear from Lindley later in the week. Or I guess it'll be the episode following this one for them. I'll get a chance to hear from her later in the week. They will get a chance to hear from them in the next episode. And now let's take a minute to hear from our sponsors. It's with their generous support that we can bring you the podcast for free. Today's episode of the Growing for Market podcast is brought to you by BCS America. On our farm, we've had our BCS two-wheel tractor for over a decade, and with no belts to slip, its all-gear-driven construction is still going strong. Though we originally got it for rototilling, we kept it even when we went mostly no-till because it can do so many other things around the farm. From snow blowing, to making raised beds with the rotary plow, to chipping wood, it can do just about anything you might need on a farm with the right attachment. Need to shred a cover crop? A BCS flail mower will make quick work of even the most vigorous cover crop and chop it up so it breaks down quickly. Want to stir in compost or amendments without inverting soil layers? A power harrow turns your BCS into a precise tilthing machine with depth control so you don't mix deeper than you want to. With so many attachments to choose from, it truly is the Swiss Army knife of farm implements. It's why, instead of saying two-wheel tractor, so many people just say BCS. Tractors and attachments are on sale through the end of the year. Visit bcsamerica.com to find sale pricing and your nearest dealer. And now, back to the show. I do want to ask you about the other issues that you work on, and I think it's important to talk about the hydroponics and organic because, since as you said, that's the genesis of your organic project. But I do want to ask you a question about that 2017, 2018 timeframe, as far as how did that come about where the USDA organic program was willing to entertain the idea of certifying hydroponics? I mean, were they just being lobbied by big farms that wanted to be able to do that?
Really, yes, they were, but it was really one farm that was the driving force in all this. So when I got into this, it was about 2013, 2014, and we were seeing all this hydroponic tomato showing up in the wholesale market. And we were like, wait a minute. In 2010, the National Organic Standards Board recommended that hydro not be permitted to be certified as organic. And we thought we had won. It was over. But it wasn't over. And it wasn't over because, as it turned out, we were dealing with very big companies. And they were quietly lobbying the top levels of the USDA to permit it, far above the level of the National Organic Program. So they were going pretty close to the top. I don't think they were actually going straight to Vilsack. I think they're going to chief of staff, somebody like that. And so the word came down from there to the head of the National Organic Program that we smile upon certifying hydro. And, at that time, there was barely, in 2010, there was like no hydro, a couple farms in the country being certified as organic. Now it's over 5,000 acres, we know, of certified production, and maybe far over that. We're not sure. That's just for one certifier. That's just for CCOF.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
So it's big. It's over $1 billion in sales, and it's transforming the marketplace for both the people producing hydrocrops, but also for the others. So we'll talk about that. But at that point, we thought it was all about tomatoes. And what I discovered, I served on the USDA. Of course, they wanted to delay. So what do? They create a task force. And at first, the task force was supposed to be 100% hydro producers. And we were like, wait a minute, that's not right. If you want a task force, you should hear from all of us. So 5 of us were selected to be on that task force. I was one of the soil people. And At the very end of that, we learned that Driscoll's was growing hydroponic blueberries and certifying them as organic. And nobody knew that. Nobody knew that. Even people on the other side, on the Organic Trade Association, didn't know it. By then, they found out. And when I realized that we were up against Driscoll's, I knew we were in a world of hurt because they have a very big microphone and we have a very little one. So we kept struggling to try and create reform, but it was somewhat of a hopeless task. And after Jacksonville, everybody was good to go. And that's when we thought we better do something. But one thing I want to point out, what I said, it's not just about people who are growing hydroponic tomatoes or hydroponic blueberries. For sure, they've completely transformed those markets, completely transformed them. And there are still soil-grown tomato growers, but not many being certified as organic. The number's gone way down. And there still are soil-grown blueberry growers. And that's slower because there were thousands of acres of soil-grown blueberries. But those growers are getting hit very hard by hydro too. So it is affecting them. But for everybody, Andrew, for every organic farmer, it's like undermining people's trust in the program, both the farmers and the eaters. So there's a reason for a dairy farmer to be upset about the certification of hydro, just the way there's a reason for a tomato farmer to be upset about Aurora being certified as an organic operation when they clearly aren't.
Right. You mean just because it's undermining people's trust in the certification when they find out, like, oh, those berries or that tomato that I grew that says organic is actually coming from hydroponic production, or for, like, if they're, like free range eggs, they find out the chicken never actually went outside.
Yes.
You mean that kind of undermining trust in the system? Yeah, well, I agree. I mean, actually, that's a really good point you make. I think, as far as, my focus here for Growing for Market is a lot on wanting to help market farmers grow. And I agree. I think there's a reason for people who aren't even necessarily growing organic tomatoes or organic blueberries want to be invested in people trusting those systems, right? Because it's sort of like natural, right? Everybody knows natural doesn't mean anything. And so for people to have trust in these systems, they have to mean something. And yeah, I think, my thought is that most consumers, when they go to the grocery store and buy a tomato or blueberries or whatever, if it says organic on it, I don't think they're thinking that it's coming from hydroponic production. And I think they would be surprised, most of them, to find out that it can be. And
unhappy.
Yeah, and it contributes. I mean, it's sort of like, I heard a discussion of the whole terminology around regenerative the other day, and heard, some people who are like doing no-till systems and using Roundup are calling their production regenerative because I guess in their eyes it's better than tillage or something. But it's like, the worry is that these terms become meaningless when they're abused.
Andrew, it's inevitable. And of course, it's inevitable that regenerative is going to be degraded as a term. It's been embraced by every big player in big food, right? I mean, all these huge farms are embracing it, but also Syngenta, Bayer, Bunge, ADM, Pepsi, McDonald's, all have said, we want to be regenerative too. We make a pledge, we're going to be regenerative by this year. And of course, it becomes meaningless. Driscoll's, they've pledged to be 100% regenerative by the end of this year. What does that mean, right? They're moving into hydroponics more and more. Is that regenerative? It's not organic and it's not regenerative. So I will say that you can't blame the good people in regenerative for this. You
Right.
Can't blame the people who have a belief and they're pursuing it and they're doing a wonderful job. But I haven't heard of a real regenerative movement yet. And when I hear of a real regenerative project, I'll go, okay, let's link arms here. Let's be friends. And I don't wish anybody ill, but I'm just saying it's going to be taken over. It is being taken over by big corporate industrial agriculture. And it's irresistible to them. It's irresistible because it's like, if finally Syngenta can say, hey, we're wearing the white hat in the movie. We're the good guys. We're preaching no-till. And you go to their website and it's beautiful and it goes on for pages and you're weeping by the end. You get to the last paragraph and it says, of course, the responsible use of scientifically approved chemicals must be part of this.
Right. Well, it makes me think. So I've been around long enough to remember. So I guess I've been working on farms for 20, 22 years or so now. And I feel like when I first started working on organic farms, sort of like big ag was just being dismissive, so small. They were just sort of like, these guys will go away. And then, if I'm not mistaken, organic is, the segment in agriculture that's growing the most, right? Is, if you think about it, people are only going to eat so much food, right? So my understanding is, other than population growth or something like that, the amount of money people spend on food is fairly flat. And then, they could see that year over year, organic sales were the ones that were growing. And so I think my interpretation of the situation is that it's one of these situations where they're sort of like, once they realized that just dismissing organic wasn't going to work, they wanted to just like co-opt the standards.
Yes.
Because I remember, I think it was back when the National Organic Program first became nationalized. And I say this, there are probably people in our audience who don't realize that organic used to be certified as like state certifiers, and then the idea was to get the NOP, National Organic Program. I forget which year that came in, but it was sort of like to standardize everything. Because I remember we worked for some farmers in New York State who felt like the National Organic Program actually lowered the standards a little bit. And I think there was a thought back when the NOP, National Organic Program, kicked in, that there might be a schism in organic between people who wanted the stronger standards. Like, I think the people that we worked for in New York said that there were standards around things like trying to lower your carbon footprint. And there may have been other points that did not make it into the National Organic Program. And I can see how I think some people may have said, like, well, it's better to have a National Organic Program. And then some people may have said, well, forget that. And they may be the kind of people here who are marketing as beyond organic or something like that. So
yeah,
I can see how, I mean, that was my thought, is that it was lobbying, right, from places who wanted to be able to have that organic label without jumping through all the hoops.
just to say, before the National Organic Program, there was some fraud. And after the National Organic Program, there is some fraud. And we're humans. And people are greedy, and some people will break the rules if they think they get away with it. And I think that I was against the National Organic Program. I was against the USDA getting involved in this at all. But I decided I was wrong. And then I decided I was right. And then I decided I was wrong. So I kind of went back and forth. And right now, I don't know what I think. I think that we have a real problem and we need to fight for it. We need to fight for what organic means, because it is important. And I think that we should fight for the word. And I think we need to come together and make it a movement again, because it certainly was a movement when I started. And it's kind of turned into a brand and a business. I don't mean that in a bad way. We were all trying to make a living. But I just think that it's simply, we're too vulnerable to just deal with this as a business operation. It has to be a movement, because other people who are really good at making money are going to come in and take that brand. And they are, and they have. So we shouldn't give it to them, which is what the Real Organic Project is about.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I agree. And Dave, I think it's worth pointing out how unusual it is worldwide to have hydroponics allowed in organics. A number of years ago, so I was working for Johnny's Selected Seeds doing the greenhouse vegetable trials there. And I was lucky enough to go to an international greenhouse conference in France. And I remember I was reading the European stipulations for organic production, and they're serious. It was like, must be growing in soil that's in contact with the bedrock or the underlying soil. I forget exactly how it was written, but I was like, wow, these guys are serious, right? Because what they're saying is you can't grow in soil in containers. You can't grow in like a concrete floored building with like piles of soil on the floor. It's like, you have to be growing in soil in the ground. And so, right, I mean, so when the USDA National Organic Program took that decision, we're basically the only ones in the world right now that are allowing hydroponics in organic. Am I correct about that?
Yeah, I'm sure there's cheating in some places. So again, there's fraud. Fraud exists. Canada's funny. They say they don't allow hydroponics, but their standards do kind of permit hydroponics. So
Hmm.
they're a little bit funny about it up there. They're trying. And the rest of the world is pretty much following the EU standard. But we have to acknowledge that we have a responsibility here as global citizens, because if there's anything that inspires people to weaken the standards, it's the US weakening the standards. And right now they're having to fight for it in Australia because of us. Because the Australian hydro people are going, hey, look at them. They're doing it. Why can't we?
Yeah.
And they feel the same in the EU. They have a huge hydro lobby there, much bigger than here. My hat is off to the European Union for standing up to that lobby and not giving in. And they're the same on livestock and pasture, and they're the same on grain fraud. They've been much stricter than us. They've grown at a faster rate in the organic market. We're about the same right now. We're about the same, whatever, $65 billion. And but they've grown faster than we have. And I look at that as proof that you can do this and still keep your integrity and it will grow. Because one of the great claims for hydroponics is, doesn't everyone deserve organic? And by that, they mean we can make it cheaper because we're not doing it organically,
Hmm.
but we can make it cheaper. And isn't that right? And this is a basic question that we all have to face. I have to say that if something is grown hydroponically, but truly without spray, without synthetic pesticides, my hat is off to them. And they do deserve a premium, just not our premium. They do deserve to start their own label, just not our label. And let them compete with us, bring it on. But to do what they're doing, no, it's just slimy.
Yeah.
It's like slimy.
Well, I agree. I've always thought, yeah, they could start hydro organics, or, in my opinion, it's not organics. It's something else that they could make a separate label for.
But they won't. They won't do that because the USDA has let them in scot-free, and they have the word that they really want, which is organic, which has
Right.
far greater market force than regenerative. Regenerative is something that a lot of young people are excited about, and they see it as the hope of an agriculture that is good for the climate, which is a legitimate, valid hope. And real regenerative, which is real organic, is a viable response to climate and a way of addressing that responsibly. But I think that that's not going to happen because what they want is the brand. They don't want a way of identifying themselves. They want a way of misidentifying themselves. So we can acknowledge that what they have is better than their brothers and sisters who are spraying more heavily in greenhouses or in fields. There's a lot of hydro in fields now. They lay out the black plastic and they put the pots or the bags of coir, and they have acres and acres of it.
Hmm. Yeah, right. Because I think they know that organic is a much more attractive label than having to blaze a new trail with hydroganics or anything like that. And so, yeah, I can see how it's much more attractive to get into that. And so, actually, I'm glad you brought up, like the outdoor container culture, because I think that might be a really good example about how it's cheaper to do that kind of production. Because then, say, going through 3 years of certification, or like our farm, for example, we were able to get certified the first year because not a whole lot had happened. Like the fields that we were growing in, it were just spread with manure, and we were able to get an affidavit the first year that we bought our farm, and so we were able to go into certified organic production the first year. But can you talk a little bit about what's going on with that container production? And also, I think there was an issue with spraying herbicides on.
Yeah, yeah. The
Yeah,
glyphosate.
you know what I'm talking. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Like, might show people who don't understand what's going on how they're able to essentially, cut corners and undercut, people who are doing real organic production.
Sure. Hydroponics is very productive in terms of your yield per square foot, whatever. And it's expensive to set up, but once it's set up, it's very profitable. Can be, should be. And of course, there's no soil involved. For organic, it's a bag of shredded coconut husk. For conventional, it's either a bag of shredded coconut husk or a bag of rock wool, which is like a fiberglass insulation. And they're both used equally. Some people prefer one, some people prefer the other. For organic, certified organic, they have to use the coir. It's called coir, the shredded coconut husk. And it's washed and treated. They will treat a lot of it with calcium nitrate. It's got many issues, but it works very well for a hydro system. What they do on a big place, they'll laser level it because they don't want the water pooling in places. And then they lay out their plastic. Before they lay out the plastic, they'll spray herbicide and they roll out the plastic, and then they put the bags on the plastic and wet them up, and they expand. We discovered that the use of herbicides, that there were lots of people who were not taking a 3-year transition, even for the field. They were spraying herbicides, laying out the plastic, and putting the bags on, and calling it organic. And the argument was fascinating, is that, well, the bag is our field. The rest is just a table, right? The soil doesn't mean anything to us. It's so screwed up to call that organic, right? Okay, so we actually came up with proof that this was happening on scale, and we presented it to the National Organic Program, and they were forced to say, no, we don't allow that. We don't allow any herbicides, any prohibited inputs to be used if you're growing on land. And I thought, oh, good, we won. And then I thought, what does that mean, growing on land? So I asked Dr. Tucker, the head of the National Organic Program, what does that mean? And she wouldn't tell me. She said, well, I'm not going to answer hypotheticals. She did that once with me before, and she regretted it. So I thought, yeah, I just want to know what the standard is. The standard is if it's growing on land, you can't. So what we've seen since then, and what we've gotten proof from certifiers, is that they're saying if it's on a 6-inch stand, so you'll have a little kind of plastic box that you put the bag on the plastic. So you got plastic mulch and then a plastic box and then your plastic bag, then it's not on the land. Same as if you were growing transplants in a greenhouse, you can spray whatever you want under the bench.
Uh-huh.
So this is not right. We all know that's not right. But they wouldn't answer a question from the head of the National Organic Standards Board about what she meant. She wouldn't answer a question from certifiers about what she meant. This is just clear fraud and a breakdown of our democratic system in this case. They've stolen the regulatory agency.
Yeah, absolutely. That's unfortunate. So does that mean that if people put their bags on the little stands, they can still use the herbicides? I mean, do we know?
Well, they'll never answer the question, but some certifiers have said, yes, that's what it means.
That's too bad, to say the least. And actually, I want to back up a little bit, because right when hydroponics was first allowed in organics, I guess it was that 2017, 2018 timeframe, you guys sued the NOP to try to stop that. Am I correct about that?
Well, they were allowing it in 2013, 2014.
Okay.
But in 2017, still nothing happened regulatorily. No recommendation was passed. It takes 2/3 vote to pass a recommendation. It was just a recommendation to stop it failed. So there was a standing recommendation from 2010 that said hydroponics should not be certified as organic. But it was happening now on scale, more and more. And yes, there was a group that sued the USDA. The lawsuit was led by the Center for Food Safety, and it included MOFGA, it included OneCert, and it included, I think, 6 farmers. For some reason, they didn't want a whole bunch of us. So I was kind of the only East Coast farmer, and the rest are from California because they were going to take it to a California court. But these were very prominent farms in California, Full Belly and Jim Cochran of Swantonberry and Paul Underhill. So these are prominent organic farmers, and they were all suing to say that the USDA should not be allowed to do this. And we lost the case, and then we appealed, and we lost the appeal. Although in the appeal, the judges said this is not a precedent. We are not allowing this to be called a legal precedent. We're just saying that we don't feel comfortable ruling against a regulatory agency, telling them what they should or shouldn't do. Right. And so the way the lawsuit was worded, that's what the suit was about. I think that there's room there for another lawsuit, a serious one, but it costs a lot of money. probably $1 million just to step up to the plate.
Yeah, and that's hard to find rattling around in the couch.
Yeah, it is.
Yes, and I do see how definitely feels like it's hard to get momentum in that space because I do know there's a lot of back and forth. I know at the USDA between, people go work for Monsanto and go work for the USDA. I mean, I know Monsanto isn't around, but back when they were, that kind of thing would happen a lot. I mean, that's my understanding is that how genetically modified crops got approved in the first place is basically, yeah, they decided to take a favorable approach to that, and then a few years later it's you find it approved. I mean, thankfully not for organic production, but for we're kind of the guinea pigs here in the United States as far as the genetically modified crops go.
The whole conventional food system is bad and it's getting worse. And it's really bad. It's making us sick. It's killing us. I truly just believe that's a fact. And you and I both have PFAS in our body. We both have glyphosate in our body. This is a fact of living in America. It's part of the air we breathe, the water we drink, and it comes from agriculture. I was just listening to a Paul Hawken book today called Carbon, very good book. He was talking about the insect apocalypse and just the amazing reduction in the numbers of insects in our country, which means an equivalent reduction in the number of birds in our country. And it's all an ecosystem, and we think we can mess with it, but we can't. It will come back on us. So I just say that to highlight that chemical agriculture is for real. It's a really bad, serious problem. It's going to make our kids sick. I've got 3 nephews who got cancer young. One of them died. There's no family history here. These are environmental toxins entering us. And it's not only agriculture. We get PFAS from Teflon and from the nice raincoat that we got from North Slope or whomever, but agriculture is the big driver.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I mean, I think about that all the time. I mean, you're probably preaching to the choir with our audience, but
that's okay. We need to preach to the choir. We are the choir, and it's a big choir. And if we ever got it together and spoke with one voice or with many voices in chorus, they wouldn't stop us.
Yeah, it's still important to talk about, even if we are preaching to the choir. I mean, we did a whole podcast episode about PFAS because you're probably aware we got a big problem with PFAS, the forever chemicals. I forget exactly what the abbreviation is, but I think PFAS are a big enough deal. I'm assuming most people in the audience have either heard of PFAS or forever chemicals. We have a big problem with that here where my farm is in Maine. And it is agriculture linked because the PFAS didn't originate in fertilizer per se, but apparently there was a lot of PFAS in the sludge, and they were allowing sludge to be spread on farmers' fields, which has never been allowed, thankfully, in organics. But I know, I have some friends who are organic farmers, but they bought the farm, that turned out to have a lot of PFAS contamination.
Not knowing.
Yeah, I think it's pretty well known now that the standard American diet, SAD, is really bad for us, all the processed foods. And, I feel like, well, I've been organic farming off, for 20 years now. And you're right. I've got PFAS in my body, and I think about my kids as I'm sure they've got PFAS and microplastics, and so we can try to do the things that we can as far as us trying to eat healthy and eat our own organic food and all that kind of stuff. But unfortunately, it goes out to everybody. Like, for example, I mean, the whole, conventional no-till, the kind where they knock down the weeds with an herbicide and plant Roundup Ready crops. I mean, that was championed as a positive development by chemical companies, saying that it would reduce herbicide use, but it's actually gone up, of course, because now people have just replaced tillage with herbicide usage, and it's very debatable whether that's any better. In many ways, I think of genetically modified crops as an enabler for that kind of conventional no-till, right? Because you couldn't really have the conventional no-till system working in the way where you let the crop sprout and then go over the top with herbicides if you didn't have genetically modified crops. And that's also why a lot of the biggest chemical companies in the world are also the biggest plant breeders, right? They want those products to go hand in glove. And so, yeah, I mean, even if it's acquired, it's just, that's why we're doing this, right? Because we know how bad it is for ourselves, not to mention the environment that, all these chemicals are getting dumped into. So I'm glad you guys are holding the line. Okay, so you've made this the Real Organic Project, which is a great way, right, for people to really stand up and be like, Hey, actually, I'm doing it the way organic was intended, right? So, can you tell us a bit about the growth of the real organic certification since creating it?
Sure. Well, we went and got 60 farms the first year, which was really fun. Lindley was driving across the country recruiting farmers. And we actually wanted 50, but we got 60, because we needed to figure out how to do what we were doing. We're up to 950 to 1,000 this year will be. And it's good. It's free. That's important. It's free to farmers, thanks to the generous people who support us so that we don't have to charge any certification fees. In a sense, we'd like to be the best of Denmark. Denmark has done tremendous work supporting organic. There, they get the government to pay the certification fees, which means everybody, you and me, because the government has been convinced that organic is a benefit to everybody, not just the people who choose to buy it in the store. If you're going to have a farm for a neighbor, you sure as heck want it to be an organic farm, right? If you're going to be drinking the water downstream from that farm, you sure as heck want it to be an organic farm and a real organic farm. So we've kept it free. So that certification program is a big part. And we have this label that we have out on food that, so that I always say we're like a dating service and we're trying to arrange a date between the organic farmers and the people who care, the organic eaters. And I just want to say one thing that really irritates me is when they talk about organic as food for the elites. And what they're implying is that organic food is a luxury item. And that's not true. Organic food is a premium item. Just the way I have an iPhone, it's a premium smartphone. But we all need a smartphone. At this point, to do most of our business, we do actually need to have a smartphone. Not everybody, and there's a couple great holdouts who've got a flip phone or maybe a wind-up phone in the house, but mostly people have a smartphone to do their business. An iPhone is a very premium smartphone, and I think organic is very premium food. We all need food to live, and a lot of the food that gets eaten in this country is not food, and it's not good for the people who eat it. It's a bad deal. But for lots of reasons, complicated reasons, that's the food that they end up eating. So organic is the food that will taste better and be better for you and make you feel better right now and make you feel better in 10 years. So it has a lot going for it. And, there's two sides of organic. One side is no pesticides, no synthetic pesticides. Great. You're not going to poison yourself with dinner. Here, would you like a little bit of Roundup on your Cheerios? No, nobody wants Roundup on their Cheerios. But lots of people get Roundup in their Cheerios because the grain crop was sprayed down as a desiccant. And so they're getting it whether they know it or not, whether they think it or not. Well, if it's organic, then you're not getting it. But the other thing that's so important about organic on a simple level is the nutritional benefit. That real organic food is nutritionally superior. And it's good for you and it makes you feel good. Then there's many other things about the organic landscape and where do you want to live and who do you want to live next to and how do you want the people to be treated who grew your food? Those are big questions. Or how do you want to be treated if you're growing somebody else's food? An organic farmer I know, when they said, well, we can't afford organic. And she said, well, if you want the people who work on our farm to be paid a living wage, it's going to cost more. That's how it is. Because otherwise, it's always the low-cost provider who's winning, and the low-cost provider is always squeezing the people who do the work a lot. But to be low cost.
Yeah, absolutely. And probably another, just preaching to the choir here, but my thought is one of the reasons why organic seems so much more expensive is because conventional agriculture is subsidized so heavily. And, most of that money goes to the biggest crops, corn, soybeans, things like that. And I look at it really as a junk food subsidy, right? Because it's artificially depressing the price of those crops. We've all paid with our tax dollars, whether we want it or not, we're subsidizing conventional corn, right? And so then when those commodities get cheaper in some cases than it costs to produce, well, then that's why everything has high fructose corn syrup and soy lecithin and things like that, because those become really cheap raw materials. They can make pretty much those into pretty much everything, and that's perverse when some highly processed food that has had multiple steps to bring it and put it in that little package is cheaper than a head of broccoli, right, or an organic tomato or something like that.
And the stuff that the grain that doesn't go into ultra processed food goes into confinement livestock operations.
Right.
And it's also sold under cost, under the cost of production. And so now it becomes that much harder for a pasture-based operation to compete in the marketplace because it's not fair. There's a great book, Barons, by Austin Frerick. Great book. And it's got an amazing foreword. So get the book, but read the foreword by Eric Schlosser. And it's this beautiful thing of quoting Adam Smith, one of the great champions of capitalism from the 1700s. And he's saying the greatest enemy of capitalism is monopoly.
Mm-hmm.
The role of government is to protect capitalism from monopoly, from undue influence. And the danger of monopoly doesn't have to do with the price to the consumer. The danger of monopoly is the threat to our democracy. And I think it's just a very moving 4 or 5 pages that he writes about this. And I think it's spot on.
Yeah, absolutely. That is a great book. I listened to that a while back. And yeah, and I mean, one of his points in there is talking about monopolies is he lists the big food, like the poultry industry, the grain industry, the dairy industry. Like he lists all the sort of like the big component parts of our agriculture, and they're all in, there's some standard for what constitutes a monopoly, and it's not I forget exactly, but basically all of our food systems are way into the monopoly territory. And yeah, I mean, a lot of that book, he's pointing out how we are paying more for it. Not only is the agriculture worse for it, people are getting paid less for it, but consumers are having to pay more because they're these big monopolies that control the pricing. So yeah, Barron's.
Yeah, it's a great book.
Excellent recommendation there, Dave.
Austin Frerick. I think Austin cites a finding that 4% of the national market would be considered a monopoly. Driscoll's is over 70% of the organic berry market in America. So they're a long way past being considered a monopoly at 4%.
Yeah.
Right? That's just total control.
Yeah, well, that is a great book if people want to go turning over rocks and really understand what's going on with our food system.
I'll throw out, we have a podcast also, and there's 2 interviews with Austin Frerick, and I think one's about to come out this weekend, actually. And also Sharon Lerner talking about PFAS. She's the goddess of PFAS journalism. She's the one who wrote that New Yorker article that just blew it up. So she just came out a few weeks ago too. We have a lot of great interviews there. If you want to get a big picture of the food system, come to the Real Organic Project podcast.
Yes, I do enjoy your podcast. I haven't listened to the PFAS episode, but I was just listening to the episode with your blueberry farming friend. I think you did that interview down in Florida. So yeah, if people in our audience enjoy podcasts, you guys have a great one. They should check that out.
Thank you, Andrew. It is. I feel honestly so privileged to be able to talk to all these people. I've talked to Al Gore. I've talked to Michael Pollan. I've talked to, Alice Waters. I've talked to Joan Gussow. All these really fantastic, Vandana Shiva, fantastic people who are so significant in our public conversation about food and agriculture.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, since we started talking about some of those other issues with the Barons, I know the Real Organic Project is active on other issues and not just hydroponics. And like I said, I do want to kind of like stick to the hydroponics just because it would be a monster podcast episode if we tried to go deep on everything you guys do. But would you tell us briefly what the other issues are that you like in the livestock in particular? Just like, can you tell us where your big areas of focus are in addition to the hydroponic and organic issue?
Yeah, well, I started going to these national meetings because of hydroponics, because as it turns out, I knew more than almost anyone in America about the confluence of hydroponics and organic, because I had a Dutch consultant for a zillion years, He was a hydroponic producer, and all his other clients were hydro. But he taught me a lot about the climate of a greenhouse and what a tomato likes. Thank you, Servas. He's fantastic. I have another one, Mark Vergelt. They're both going to be in our winter symposium on hydroponics. I've interviewed both of them. And as I started going to these meetings, I discovered that there was something rotten in Denmark, so to speak. I discovered that this was bigger than just hydroponic. I didn't know that. I really didn't. In Vermont, organic is working beautifully. We have no industrial organic in Vermont, and we have nobody cheating the system. But when I started to go to these national meetings and I started to learn about the confinement of livestock, and then I learned about the grain fraud, and especially the imported grain fraud, although there's domestic too. And I was like, oh, this is so much bigger than I thought. And then it just kept getting bigger and bigger. So, just briefly about the livestock, the two that I have heard the most about is dairy. And the Washington Post did a series of articles by Peter Wierisky. I interviewed him too. He's great. And, they're really important articles. They were back, I think, in 2017, maybe 2016. And he covered Aurora Dairy, and he really did them up. He visited the farm a number of times. He did flyovers. He had their milk tested, and it was CAFO milk. These were not pasture raised animals according to the lab tests, and they could compare it to other animals who are grain fed and animals who are actually out on pasture. So he proved for me beyond a shadow of a doubt that we have a real problem in organic certification. There are a lot of great organic dairy farmers out there, great ones. You can go to Organic Valley and you'll find much better farmers, but then you get further and further away and then you get to the house brands in the supermarkets, and that's all confined. Even the organic is all confinement, right? So it's just the way it is. They buy the cheapest stuff on the market and they buy it in bulk, and then they undercut everybody. This is what happens. And then they start talking about, well, it must be nice if you're rich to get the milk that actually comes from a cow in the pasture. It's so screwed up. What about the healthcare costs associated with that cheaper milk? But they never will talk about that. So that was one. Another one was poultry. And actually, poultry kind of started, the confinement of poultry started in Massachusetts. And one outfit applied for certification with Bay State Organic and was declined. And they sued them and went into a court, and they won in the court. And they said, our chickens have outdoor access. They built this lean-to screened-in porch, concrete floor. It's not outside in any imagination, but Bay State lost that court case. So that's going on. And I think Peter also wrote about those in the Washington Post, and he focused on Herbrooks was one place that 1 out of every 10 eggs sold in America is organic, came from this one Herbrooks facility, multi-level, different floors of chickens. So yeah, it's not good. If people saw them, they would never buy that again. It only works on misleading the consumer, the eater.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's people have one idea when they buy organic, and that is bad for the credibility of the whole standard when you have places like that are basically doing confinement livestock that can get certified. I'm glad you guys are working on that, and we'll go into that a little bit more with Lindley in the next episode, just because otherwise this one would be a monster. I wanted to loop back on something you were talking about, the healthfulness of the food and the nutrient density. It's interesting. In the next issue of Growing for Market, we have an article about nutrient density, basically talking about all the studies people may be familiar with about how the nutrient density of food has been going down over time, and what growers can do about it, and how they can also use that as a marketing angle, to say, hey, our food is more nutrient dense, and there's actually some ways that are being developed for farmers to do quicker nutrient density tests. One thing that they talk about in the article is doing a bricks test. And another thing, of course, there's a smartphone app that somebody's developing that they hope to have live within a few years, where they can scan food and see how nutrient dense it is. But in the article, one of the things they talk about, we have a writer who did a bunch of interviews, and they said that they talked to some people who had bought produce all over the country and done testing on the nutrient density of it. And he said it was really hard to predict which food was going to be more nutrient dense than others. But one of the main indicators was microbial activity, because as you know, plants have evolved to work in concert with fungi and microbes and different things. And so plants that are growing in soil that have those microbial and fungal relationships, it's a symbiotic relationship. And so, it's a longer idea. By the time this podcast comes out, actually, that article will also be out. We didn't plan this, but I was like, wow, this will be a great little dovetail. I'm hoping that that's something that, people want to be healthy. People know that the standard American diet is not healthy. And I'm hoping that that can be a marketing point for, say, real organic certified farmers to say, like, hey, my food is more nutrient dense, in putting tools in farmers' hands to be able to prove it to people. So I hope that that can be something that farmers can use as to help, if they're getting undercut basically by hydroponic or corner cutting organics, to be able to say, like, hey, my produce is actually, in addition to being delicious and fresh, it's also actually better for you. So that'll be something that people can read by the time this interview is out. And I should say, my farm, we're proudly certified or real organic certified as well. I give all the credit to my wife for that, because in the decade or so that I've taken over growing for market gets a lot of my time these days. And she does a lot of the farming. And so we had a visit from a real organic certifier a couple of years ago. And so I say we're certified, but I want to give her all the credit.
That's right.
For that.
That's great. Yeah. Well, we're all over. It's fascinating. I think this year, for the first time, California is pulling ahead of Vermont for the most farms, but it should be ahead. My goodness. They've got thousands of organic farmers there. So it's such a fascinating farm culture. Every region is different. And my favorites, like for whom the movement is so strong, are like Vermont and Maine. They're just fantastic. But, New York, Hudson Valley, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Minnesota, there's a lot of organic farming out there. It's really good. Listen, one thing I wanted to also say is we also have a weekly letter that Lindley and I labor over. And every Sunday, a letter comes out. And usually we're highlighting a podcast interview that we've done, but we are reflecting on why we did that interview and why this is important. It's pretty interesting. Like everything else we do, it's free. So if people go to realorganicproject.org, they can sign up and we will send it to you.
Yeah, check it out. It's a great newsletter. I get it. Yeah, so if people want to know more, they can go there. I wanted to ask you about how this whole issue is affecting certifiers, because I know, for example, our certifying organization here in Maine, MOFGA, Maine Organic Farmers and Gardeners Association, won't certify hydroponic operations as organic. And so is that where we're at, where it just depends? So like if somebody in Maine had a hydroponic operation that they wanted to get certified organic, they would just have to find somebody, a different organization, that come in state and certify it?
You probably have to go to California, the CCOF.
Mm-hmm.
They're the kind of biggest certifier of hydro as organic in the world. There are now the terrific 10 certifiers, and MOFGA is one of them, and Vermont Organic Farmers is another, and NOFA New York is another, and OneCert is another, and Ohio OEFFA is another, and OCIA is another. We have a lot, and between them, these 10 certify over 8,000 operations as organic. So there is a rebel alliance right now, and this group openly says we will not certify hydroponic because it's not legal, and we don't believe in it. And so far, they haven't taken that group to court, and I don't think they would. I don't think they dare.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to decertify a third of the country. And I want to point out, it's not just those 8,000 farmers who agree. There are another 8,000 or 10,000 or 15 or 20,000 who agree. It's just their certifier hasn't had the courage or the belief to sign on. It takes courage to do it, but it's happening. And the more that people do it, the more that we will get something done here. But yes, MOFGA is a great leader in all this.
Yeah, MOFGA's great. Yeah, I mean, it's funny. It's speaking of the regional differences in the country, it makes me think about how we moved up here to Maine we were farming in Pennsylvania before this, and about 15 years ago. And I remember doing my homework about Maine. And I think at the time, Maine had the 10th highest number of certified organic farms. So not acreage, of course, but number of farms, because I think California, of course, probably has the most acreage and bigger farms, but we've got all these, this small farm culture. I think maybe partially because this part of the country was settled so long ago. It's all, there are a lot of small farms up here in this part of the country. So I found that surprising. I was not surprised that Maine didn't have the number one amount of acreage, but I was surprised. I would think Vermont might be similar as far as having a very high number of certified organic farms, even if the acreage doesn't compare to somewhere like California.
Yeah, no, Vermont, it probably has even a few more than Maine. And I know that last I saw, Vermont had 17% of its farmland certified as organic. That is, I believe, a national record. That puts them up with a European country, and a good one, to do that. So, but that's partly because we have a lot of maple forest certified as organic for maple syrup. Of course, we've all struggled in the Northeast with the dairy destruction. I'll let Lindley talk about it, but it's grim. It's grim, and it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be that way. In 2016, 2017, those little organic dairy farms were doing just fine, and now they're going out of business. And that's just because we've allowed scoundrels in. That's all.
Yeah, and that's true. I know dairies around here are struggling, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's something we can get into in the next interview. But it's sad to see, because there's generational farms that have been making a living that way for generations are now finding it very hard to make a living.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Dave, I've got a personal project that I was wondering if I could bend your ear about for a minute, get an opinion on it.
Sure.
So, I wrote this book, The Greenhouse and Hoop House Growers Handbook. I think it's been out for almost a decade now, which would make sense because I wrote it because I was doing the greenhouse trials at Johnny's Seeds. And in addition to doing the trials, part of my job was taking grower questions. So I helped growers troubleshoot things. And for one thing, I was getting a lot of the same questions over and over again. And so it made me think that either the information is either not out there or it's not well disseminated. And honestly, the other thing is I had access to a lot of greenhouse texts and things, and almost all of them were written for hydroponics. And so, and I got to learn from a lot of hydroponic growers. There's those big greenhouses up in Canada. I got a chance to, travel in the Leamington area, and there's a lot in Quebec also. But I tried out a lot of their stuff, and I wanted to write something that was focused on soil growing too. And so, I think there's one thing, plant management from the soil up. And, I wanted to write a book that would talk about all the plant management aspects, including management for soil. And so 10 years ago, when I ended up taking over Growing for Market, I was actually planning out a bigger greenhouse project myself. I wanted to build a greenhouse as part of our farm, and I wanted to try the most energy saving technologies as possible. I was inspired by some growers using geothermal up in Quebec that I had seen, and trying to incorporate solar and things like that to basically build the lowest carbon footprint greenhouse that you possibly could. And that didn't happen because the opportunity to take over Growing for Market came up. And so I did that instead. And in a way, I'm glad I did, because I think that what I wanted to do was build that greenhouse project using as much green energy as possible, and share it. Because I think things like yield data are really hard to come by, because just, seed companies and places like that don't want to make promises. If they say like, oh, you're going to get this much yield off of this variety, and someone doesn't, they're going to be angry and come back. And so hard data for greenhouse growers is hard to come by. And so I wanted to use some sort of like cutting edge and emerging technology to make this greenhouse as green as possible. And now I realize, almost a decade later, I still have the idea, but I realize that it might actually be better as a nonprofit. Sort of like, if you're doing experimental stuff, it might be better not to base your livelihood on it. And so, in fact, I did a few podcasts ago, when this one comes out, I did an interview with a woman here in the town that my farm is just north of, named Amber Lamke. And what she did is she was able to use a combination of not-for-profit and for-profit partnerships to take over this old jailhouse that was still the county jail when I moved to Skowhegan 15 years ago. It was built in 1895, and it was still the county jail and kind of an eyesore. And what she did is they finally built a new county jail. She was able to buy it and make a grist mill So one of the only places grinding main grains now, which has really kicked off a revival of grain growing here in central Maine. And I got to thinking, like, maybe this project that I still want to do is better as a nonprofit. And so that's my idea, is that I want to build it now, but I want to devote part of the space in the greenhouse to essentially trialing. I think also because I liked doing that at Johnny's, and I think I still got that in my blood. But my whole idea is to make all the details of my project, if I can do it. I'm in the process of incorporating and trying to get nonprofit status for my company so that I can build this greenhouse and share the numbers with people, because banks don't really like risk. And my idea is that I could share all the construction, all the energy usage with people, and also trial varieties and share my results for soil growing, and so that other growers can look at what we've done, and perhaps it'll help them approach a bank and be able to get a loan, or just make their own growing decisions, like compare, say, growing methods or varieties or something like that, and make better decisions to just help move the whole sector forward. And so that is my idea. And I was just curious if you thought that would be useful, just because I think, not everybody wants to share their yield data, and I understand why. And so I was thinking, if I do it as a nonprofit, that was my idea. And if I don't know if there would even be if Real Organic Project would want to share the ideas. And I'm a year or two away from actually building this project in order to help soil growers. Also, if I can get nonprofit status, I'm going to need a board of directors. And so I was also thinking I might ask you or somebody there at the Real Organic Project, if they would want to be in our board of directors. So, this is my idea. This is your chance to tell me it's a terrible idea or give me your 2 cents.
Okay, it's a great idea. I've been working on a master class for a couple of years about growing tomatoes. And I don't know that I'm going to actually do it, because I'm not sure that anybody cares enough for all the TLC that it requires. But it's an interesting thing of what do you tell somebody so they can cut out the first 8 years of failure and maybe, move to the head of the line.
Okay, so you've been really generous with your time, Dave. Is there anything else that I should have asked you or that you'd like to say before we let you go?
No, this was a great conversation. I think just everyone's, so many people are listening to this already doing it. I just say we're stronger together.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was just talking to Elliot this morning on the phone, and I talked about that he could have done exactly what he did as a farmer and not told anyone about it. And it would have been a wonderful life. And he would have had really happy customers who would have so appreciated the very good food that he provided for them. But he chose to be public with that, and he chose to write books, and he chose to speak a lot, and he chose to do all this. He did a TV show, and it has had great impact. But that's my point, is we need to talk to each other, and we need to come together, and then we will have a really great impact. And it isn't about making one big company. It's about making 1,000 small companies, but together.
Yeah. Absolutely. We're stronger together, and I really appreciate what you're doing for our movement, Dave. Before I let you go, where can people find you? I know you talked about it a little bit, but let's just put a pin in it here at the end of the show. Where can people find you in the ROP, wherever you want them to look you up?
Yeah, realorganicproject.org, just as it sounds. And that's our website.
Thank you, Dave. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Growing for Market podcast. If you've been enjoying the show, please consider giving us a follow and a rating or a review. It really helps others find the podcast. For more tips and tricks from farmer to farmer, check out our magazine at growingformarket.com. Whether you're a commercial grower or just want to grow like one, subscribe to Growing for Market magazine for the nitty-gritty of growing, marketing, and the business of market farming. We publish 10 issues per year with articles written by experienced farmers on topics ranging from tools and techniques to farm business operations and marketing. If you've been listening to the Growing for Market podcast and haven't yet checked out Growing for Market magazine, we've made a change so you can try the magazine for free. We've added a free month to the beginning of all first-time subscriptions. Try out the digital or paper magazine for a month, and if it's not for you, cancel within 28 days and you'll never even get billed. All subscriptions get you a year of the magazine, plus 150 downloadable back issues from the last 15 years and over 1,700 archived articles. With digital subscriptions starting at just $39 a year, head on over to growingformarket.com and subscribe today to benefit from over 3 decades of writing by farmers, for farmers in Growing for Market magazine.